little bit about the background information. We did invite Northern Health. Unfortunately, they declined. So, a little bit more the new information. Technically, Todd says they sent you. They just okay. I can still go there, but I won't. It's election time, so part of the Fluoride group wanted the people who are running for elections to just sort of stand up and be recognized, and we thank you for being here. I think that people who run for elections are amazing people because they take some of the stuff that we give them. And the two gentlemen here that are here tonight have more than heard controversy themselves. I will not accept any controversy in here while they're speaking at all. If you have an opinion and you want to share it, you're more than welcome to talk to them afterwards, but any sort of loud outbursts and anything like that, I will very unpolitely ask you. This is a touchy subject. It's something we care about. There are people here who want to know what this is all about, why we're doing what's being done for sure. We want the information to be clear, so we brought in two experts to do that, and I thank you both. I will talk about the first one, which is Dr. Paul Connett. He's a graduate from Cambridge University, and he holds a Ph.D. from Dartmouth College. His specialty is in environmental chemistry and toxicology. He focuses on fluoride toxicology, and he's here to do the fluoride debate, and we're very proud, or very pleased to have him here. Thank you, Paul. The second speaker is Dr. Todd Whitcombe. He's a local chemistry professor and scientist, science columnist in the Citizen. He is also the chair of the chemistry department, chemistry, environmental, science, environmental, and engineering at UNBC. He holds a Ph.D. in Bio-Inorganic chemistry from the University of Victoria. So we're very lucky to have two esteemed people speaking today. So how the debate is going to go today is I'm going to have each one of them introduce themselves. They're going to have 5 minutes to introduce themselves, and we'll start with Dr. Paul Connett. After they do their introduction, we'll have 3 questions. We'll go through the 3 questions. They'll each have 5 minutes to respond to those questions, and then after that, each will be given 2 minutes to rebut the question. So we will, once the debate is halfway through the debate, we'll take a 10-minute break so you can maybe talk with them. Also, if you have questions, please feel free to write them down. I will take some of those questions and present them to you so they can respond to those as well. So we will begin with Dr. Paul Connett.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Professor Todd Whitcombe for debating this afternoon. This is a very unusual event. In 18 years, I think I've had 7 debates. Most of the promoters of fluoridation promote it like parrots and defend it like chickens. But he has at least had the courage of his convictions, and he's here today, and I appreciate that very much. The audience has already heard my position, my arguments against fluoridation. I argue that it's unusual, it's unnatural, it's unethical, it is unnecessary, it's unsafe, and it is ineffective. Now, I've never met Todd Whitcombe before, but I did read his comments in the paper here from a few days ago, and I'm just going to respond to some of those comments. First of all, he says, in the course of my lifetime, I've seen the number of middle-aged people with dentures plummet. So the assumption is that you see dental decay decline, and you assume, if you're in a fluoridated community, that fluoridation is the cause of that. And indeed, if you looked at tooth decay declining in these fluoridated countries like New Zealand, Australia, Ireland, and the United States, you'd be tempted to think that this plummet in tooth decay is due to fluoridation until you look at the non-fluoridated countries and find the same decrease in tooth decay. And I suspect that the same decrease in the number of dental dentures that people are wearing. Secondly, Todd says there's no question about it, Fluoridation, it lowers dental costs. Well, earlier on, I talked about Scotland, have the Scottish Child Smile program, where the children without any sign of caries had slumped from about 43% to 73% in 10 to 12-year-olds, in a program that doesn't involve forcing kids to drink fluoridated water. It focuses on education, not fluoridation, and better diet. And talking about the cost, Glasgow researchers found that the scheme had reduced the cost of treating dental disease in 5-year-olds by more than half between 2001 and 2010. So I don't think that this argument that you should do fluoridation because of saving dental costs is a legitimate one. The only reason that fluoridation, I won't go through the details of the Scottish program, but you can see them afterwards. The only reason that fluoridation looks relatively cheap is because you're using a hazardous waste product from the phosphate fertilizer industry as your fluoridating chemical. If you use the fluoride, the same quality of fluoride from dental products, then the use in dental products, then it would be cost prohibitive. Todd also says there's no question about it. Fluoridation improves lives. None of this, by the way, not one single fact that he mentions in his article is backed up with any documentation, no reference to the scientific literature. And it would be interesting today for you to count how many times he actually refers to dental literature or scientific literature to support his case, as opposed to citing authorities. But let's look about improving lives. Are these children in America, have their lives been improved? Those kids, that 28.5% of them have very mild dental fluorosis, 8.6% of them have mild dental fluorosis, and 3.6% have moderate or severe. This is mild dental fluorosis. 8.6% of kids aged 12 to 15 in the United States have this condition, and 3.6% have moderate or severe. Have those lives been improved? It would be reckless to assume that those children had their teeth damaged in that way, have had no other tissues impacted. He says, Todd says, fluoridation of our water supply makes sense. It is why Health Canada, the Canada Dental Association, the World Health Organization, the American Dental Association, among many other organizations, all stand by this process. This is what you're seeing again and again and again from promoters, the use of authority, the use of endorsements, and not the use of primary science. So fluoridation promoters, like Todd, rely on endorsements, not on primary studies. Here's the ADA, whole list of organizations that endorse fluoridation. But the majority, so impressive, eh? All those organizations. But notice they haven't impressed most of the countries in the world. Most of the countries in the world have not been impressed by the arguments here. Most of the people, over half the people drinking fluoridated water are in North America, Canada, and the United States. 97% of Europe does not fluoridate its water, and guess what? Their teeth are just as good as the countries which fluoridate.
Good afternoon. And thanks everybody for coming out. And I'm pleasantly surprised by the number of people who are here. This is really great. I don't have a nice PowerPoint slide. I'm a little busy doing other things right now. And as a consequence, really didn't have time to put this together. Nor do I spend my days studying fluoride. So right off the top, I have to hand it to my worthy opponent over there. I'm not an environmental toxicologist. I don't study fluoride. This is not what I do. What I do study is how metals and other compounds interact with your body, and what they do, and how they behave, and what they do when they get in there. And yes, I mean, I probably won't quote from the dental literature. I've read a great deal of it. I've read many studies about fluoride and the like, both for and against. And I could probably, if I really dig around in my brain, pull you out some chapter and verse on this, but you know, the scientific literature is something that scientists happen to like and they happen to work with. but it doesn't mean a lot in some senses. My first question for you, by the way, how many people here are truly here with an undecided mind? Just stick up your hands, just out of curiosity. Good. At the end of the day, these debates about things such as fluoride are, there's a lot of debates. People like to frame things in a debate. If you remember a few years ago, there was a big debate in the United States promoted by Fox News about President Obama's birth certificate. The birther debate, it was called. And everybody was very concerned about this, and there was a big debate. No, there wasn't. There wasn't a debate. There was no debate in this issue. The facts were clear. George, or whatever his name is, Barack, that's it. I wanted to say George Bush. Damn. Barack Obama was born in Hawaii, and the birth certificate was there. So why do people frame it as a debate? Well, debates lead to open questions. And open questions mean that we can play around with uncertainties, and we can game it, we can fiddle with it. The biggest debate we have facing us right now is climate change. And there's lots of people who would say, oh, we have to have a debate about climate change. And because we're in debate, there's whole governments that aren't doing anything. Well, it's still debatable. The United States refuses to do anything about climate change or address climate change because it's still debatable. Well, seriously? Does anybody here really think that on October 18th, when you can go and play golf in Prince George, that the world's climate isn't changing? You know, because that's what I did this morning. I went and played around the golf because I could. We still can at this time of year in this town. And yet, people want to frame it as if it's a debate. I would suggest to you that the fluoride debate really isn't a debate. And so what we're going to do today really isn't engage in a debate, but rather we're going to express our opinions and present you some information, and we'll try to convince you that what I have to say is different from what he has to say and my opponent has to say. And maybe you'll believe me, and maybe you'll believe him. Some of you, as I said, probably have your minds made up. Some of you are still going to hopefully come away with enough information to maybe make an informed decision. But that's what this is about today. And hopefully we'll get there. And if you do have any questions, I'm an easy person to find. I have an office at the university. You're more than welcome to come and talk to me anytime. On that note, thank you.
I like what you said. Today is about informing. Some of us have made a decision, some have not. And today is really about trying to give you the best information that we can. So this part of the debate is going to be, I'm going to give each speaker, I'll read out a question, they'll each have 5 minutes, and then the second speaker will have 2 minutes to speak back to that and give their point of view. So first question, just so you know, both speakers prepared the questions beforehand, so there's no surprises. Is fluoride a sound, ethical, medical practice or not? And
You can go first.
Is fluoridation sound and ethical practice? I say absolutely not. It's not a sound medical practice. It's in fact the only time that we've used the public water supply to deliver medicine or human treatment. And the reason for that is pretty obvious. Once you put a medicine in the water, you can't control the dose. That depends on how much water people drink and how much fluoride they're getting from other sources. And it's the total dose that has the ability to harm you. You can't control who gets the fluoride. It goes to everybody, including bottle-fed infants. And bottle-fed infants are getting about 250 times more fluoride than a breastfed infant, more than what Mother Nature intended. So it's completely indiscriminate. It goes to young people, old people, goes to sick people, goes to people with borderline iodine deficiency who shouldn't get more fluoride, goes to people with poor kidney function who can't get rid of the fluoride, so it accumulates in their bones faster. But most importantly, the reason that it's unsound and unethical is you're forcing medication on people without their informed consent. Now, for those who say, no, 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 people can get bottled water or reverse osmosis, that does not apply to families of low income. So it's unethical to force fluoride on a community or sub-community, if you like, that can't afford bottled water or reverse osmosis. So they're forced to drink it. And those low-income families are more likely to have poor nutrition. And we know from studies in India that fluoride's toxicity is made worse by poor nutrition. If they have low protein, low calcium, low vitamins, then fluoride affects them more. So not only have you trapped this low-income families with the practice that they can't afford to avoid, but also it's possibly worse for their children. So something which goes ahead with good intentions. We've got to help families of low income fight tooth decay in their children. Absolutely agree with them. But as I said at the beginning, Scotland has shown that we can deal with this issue without forcing fluoride into the drinking water, as has 97% of Europe also done that. So it's unethical that the community is doing to everyone what an individual doctor can do to no one. And going back for a moment to low-income children from low-income families, one of the aspects of fluoride's harm, which I documented this afternoon, is lowering of IQ. Lowering of IQ at levels which offer no margin of safety. The lowest level found, 1.26 parts per million. There's no margin of safety to protect all our children. And the last children in this country that need to have their IQ lowered, and I hope you would agree with me, are children from low-income families, because their IQs have already been compromised by their housing, their education, their lower diet, their parents' time to attend to everything. They're too busy in many respects. So we are making it worse for the very children that we're trying to benefit. So we should be taking opportunity of the fact that other countries have shown it is possible to fight the scourge of tooth decay in low-income families without this unethical and clumsy medical practice.
I'm drinking from the fluoridated water, by the way. So the question, is it a sound, what was the exact word? Sound medical practice or not? And we live longer, healthier lives than any generation in history. People in Canada, a person born in Canada today has an average life expectancy of about 80 years. Go back a century, the average person in Canada had a life expectancy of about 50 years. Now, that's an average life expectancy, and I spend a great deal of time in some of my courses trying to explain the difference between overall life expectancy and duration of life and average life expectancies and so on and so forth. But it's a measure of overall societal health. And I mean, if you look at it, for example, Galileo lived to be 65. Julius Caesar was killed at 58. So if people always died when they were 30, 2,000 years ago, Julius Caesar would have been this strange sort of old man that nobody would have understood. No, people typically live to be about 64, 2,000 years ago, and it's progressed forward till, you know, now you can reasonably expect to get to a certain age. But anyways, we live longer, healthier lives than at any point in the past. And the reason we live longer, healthier lives is not because we have a bunch of drugs, you know, things like aspirins and so on. It's not because we have doctors, although please don't take any offense to any doctors in the room. The reason we live longer is because we have some public health measures. The first of which is clean water. And that's a really important thing, having clean water. But the other sort of public health measures are things like putting fluoride in water, or putting chlorine in water. Now, if you can argue that fluoride, people shouldn't be subjected to fluoride because, well, they're doing so without their informed consent, and I'll get back to that in a second, you have to also argue that they shouldn't be subjected to chlorine, which we put in water, to prevent disease. And the argument that it's a medicine, well, fluoride is a medicine because you ingest it. Well, so is chlorine because you ingest it. So if you're going to argue against fluoride as a public health measure, that really was 5 minutes, or was that just a rebuttal?
2 minute rebuttal.
I thought we were doing 5, and then 2 and 2.
You're done.
Let's
You're cut.
That was my impression, my apology.
One, two, sorry.
It's 5, 5, 2, 2.
Yeah, 5.
Sorry.
Thank you. Okay. Anyways, so if we're going to argue against public health measures, then we have to argue against all of the public health measures. So, I had this really strange experience a little while back. I was actually at a breakfast meeting and I was listening to this woman talk about work she's doing in Mongolia. And she said, you know, these kids there, they're suffering from rickets. And I don't understand this because they all drink lots and lots of milk. And then she sort of left it at that. I don't understand why this disease happens. Turns out, you see, rickets is a disease that happens when you have vitamin D deficiency. And if you don't get enough vitamin D, you get rickets. So how do we stop that? We put vitamin D in milk. But we put vitamin D in milk. It isn't found there naturally. It's a public health measure. So we can argue that we shouldn't force people to ingest fluoride. You also have to argue that we shouldn't force them to drink vitamin D. Let's get it out of the, you know, the fact that some people have rickets, it's not a big problem. We won't be medicating people. Or how about folic acid? We put folic acid in bread. It's a way of helping people. It's a medical, well, in that case, I mean, I would argue that that is a drug. And you put it in there specifically to help people's health. We do a number of these sort of things. So if you're going to argue that we have to get rid of one public health measure, you better be willing to argue that we should get rid of all public health measures. Because all of them proceed in the same sort of fashion. If you're going to argue that, geez, you know, we shouldn't do something against somebody's will without informed consent, I ask you, what is the point of this referendum then? Because about 14,000 people in this city live or are below the age of 18. And they're not allowed to vote in this referendum. They have no say in the decisions made by the majority of people who are adults, who are over 18 years of age, most of whom aren't really going to have to suffer from growing up with another set of baby teeth or anything like this, right? And those people have zero say. The majority gets to decide their fate with regard to fluoride. So I ask you, if it's unethical to do something to people without their informed consent, what are you going to do with all those kids? You know, how many one-year-olds get to have informed consent on the issue? How many day-old kids? I'll leave you with that thought. Thanks.
The way I will run it is I will go 5 minutes, then a rebuttal, 5 minutes, then a rebuttal.
You want to do
So
5 and 5 and rebuttal, or 5 and rebuttal?
5 rebuttal, 5.
5, 2.
Well, I'll give you 2.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that right?
I'm totally confused.
I know.
So just tell me each time what I've got to do.
I'll tell you right now you have to rebuttal, and he'll rebuttal, and then I'll sort it out after that.
Can I rebut what you just said?
Absolutely.
Okay.
You got 10 minutes.
First of all, I think it's preposterous to suggest that if we reject adding fluoride to the drinking water, it's tantamount to rejecting all public health policies. I mean, this is rather silly, I think, in my view. The examples he cited, I'm not objecting to using chlorine and treating the water. You're treating the water, you're making the water safe to drink. There are other ways of doing it, but the payoff for making the water safe to drink is very, very obvious. The payoff for putting fluoride into the drinking water, where you're not treating the water, but you're using this clumsy vehicle for delivering the fluoride to people, the payoff for that is non-existent in my view. And then he compares this with the addition of folic acid to certain foods and vitamin D to milk. Here you've got nutrients. There's no argument at all about the need for vitamin D and folic acid to the human body and development. No argument at all. But nobody has ever demonstrated that fluoride is an essential nutrient. So again, this is apples and oranges on both fronts. And then he says, well, fluoridation must be okay because we're living longer. Well, be aware that one of the reasons that the average life expectancy is going up partly is because of the infant mortality rates are going down, which can hugely influence those numbers. But the other thing I would urge you to look at is not just the quantity of life, but the quality of life. Look at what's happening to our old people today, with millions and millions of them with conditions like arthritis, conditions like diabetes, conditions like Alzheimer's disease. And nobody is really understands why all these things are escalating at exponential proportions. But one of the candidates for an increase in arthritis rates is fluoride. One of the candidates for increasing Alzheimer's disease is possibly fluoride. And fluoride is also particularly dangerous for people that drink a lot of water, which includes diabetics.
But that's okay. We'll work it out.
5 minutes to...
Yes. So I've got another 2 minutes to rebut what he just said and rebut his arguments, and then we'll go to 5 and 2. So
first of all, I apologize. I was looking at my notes. We will go 5 and then 5 because otherwise it puts the other person at a disadvantage.
So I'm happy with whatever you come up with.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Sure. I would like to point out that I'm not a medical ethicist, and neither is my opponent. Neither of us are medical ethicists. I do have colleagues who are medical ethicists, and I ask them, is it ethical to put fluoride in drinking water? They don't seem to see the problem with that. The question of whether it's unethical or not isn't a question, it's a question of relatively measuring benefit versus risk. And then from an ethical point of view, benefits outweigh the risks involved in having fluoride. My opponent likes to say that fluoride is toxic. Yeah, sure, that's one way of interpreting life. And if you're an ecotoxicologist, I would say that probably everything is toxic if you take a certain aspect to it. And this is one of the problems, is that when you use the word toxic, toxic is a word that has a lot of semantic loading, and it means different things to different people. If I say this to you that something is poisonous, if I said to you this water is poisonous, you'd all go, yeah, well, it's got fluoride in it. But the water itself is poisonous if you look at it in the right perspective. If I drink enough of this, if I sit down and just binge on water, I can actually kill myself on water. One of the ones that you try to use with first-year students to get them to understand the concepts around things like toxicity is you point out that the longer you breathe oxygen, the more likely it is that you're going to die. And indeed, if you breathe oxygen long enough, eventually you will die. No question about it. About 120 years is the maximum anybody's ever been able to breathe oxygen before they died. Okay? Hold on a second. How long can you live without oxygen? Well, the answer is 0, right? Well, it's about 2.5 minutes if you really want to get technical about it. But at the end of the day, when you're talking about toxicity, toxicity is not a simple thing as simply saying fluoride is toxic, bad. Everything else is not toxic, good, right? Vitamin D will cause you problems if you have too much of it. If you're worried about dose response curves, how are you going to control for that? Especially if you're going to put it in milk. If you're worried about fluoride being toxic, no, we're down to 2 minutes now. Okay, I will shut up in a minute, but if you're worried about fluoride being toxic, there's an old saying, it's by a guy named Paracelsus. And what he said is that only the dose makes the poison. The simple reality is that no matter what you have around you, it really is a question of dose as to whether something is toxic or not. Okay? And that's why we're done there. Now we'll go to whether it's
Okay, so we're going to go 5 minutes, then 5 minutes, then rebuttal.
Go ahead.
Okay. Is fluoridation effective? Is our next question.
Toxic? Yeah. Is it toxic? That's very good. That follows on from Todd's last. What?
The question was effective.
Is it effective?
Yes.
Okay, well that relates very much. But let me just, if I may, just spend a minute. I think Todd trivialized the whole toxic decision. Yes, Paracelsus is right. Given anything in enough dose, it can be toxic. But that's hardly relevant to this argument. We know that at levels at which we fluoridate, a large number of children are going to have dental fluorosis. They're harmed. That's the first toxic effect. They don't have to drink gallons and gallons of water for that. Number two, I showed earlier on that at 1.26 parts per million, some children in China had their IQ lowered. You don't have to drink much water. You certainly wouldn't have to drink enough water to kill you with the water to have that toxic effect. So the whole issue of comparing low and high doses without defining what you mean by low and high, you can get away with anything, which is what Todd attempted to do with that trivialization. What we should be talking about is margin of safety. What is the margin of safety between the dose which causes harm and the doses that children are likely to have? And I argue for a number of things. There's no margin of safety to protect children against dental fluorosis. There's no margin of safety to protect adults from the first symptoms of fluoride poisoning of the bone. There's no margin of safety to protect children against lowered IQ. And there's probably no margin of safety to protect us against lowered thyroid function. But, as he said, it's got to be a balance between, as far as the ethics are concerned, it's a balance between the benefits and the risks. And I would argue that the evidence that fluoride lowers IQ is stronger than the evidence that fluoride...
The question was effective, and
I'm just saying the evidence that fluoride lowers IQ is stronger than the evidence that it lowers tooth decay. And I gave examples this afternoon. Number one, if you compare tooth decay in 12-year-olds, this is the World Health Organization, you compare non-fluoridated and fluoridated countries for 12-year-olds, the decline in tooth decay in 12-year-olds is coming down as fast, if not faster, in non-fluoridated countries as fluoridated ones. And if you look at the levels today in tooth decay in 12-year-olds, it's a wash. You could not tell whether those children had grown up in a fluoridated or a non-fluoridated country. If you look at the largest study ever conducted in the United States on benefits, they found the best that they could find was a saving of 0.6 of one tooth surface out of 128 tooth surfaces in a child's mouth. Now this wasn't a study done by an opponent of fluoridation. This was a study done by the National Institute of Dental Research. They looked at 39,000 children in 84 communities. And if you compare the children who lived all their lives in a fluoridated community with the children who lived all their lives in a non-fluoridated community, the average saving was 0.6 of one tooth surface. And that wasn't even shown to be statistically significant. So how can you, Todd, talk about comparing the benefits outweigh the risks when you can show, or your proponents can show, a non-statistical saving of 0.6 of a tooth surface, and we're talking about reductions in IQ of possibly 1, 2, or even more IQ points, especially for high water consumers. I don't think you get out of the starting track when you're comparing benefits and risks on this issue. How many minutes do I have?
You're a minute left.
I got a minute left. Now, another study, that was the largest study done in the United States. The most precise study done in the United States was done by Warren and co-workers. And what they looked at is they calculated how much fluoride each child was getting from birth. Each child, they calculated how much fluoride they're getting from water, how much they're getting from toothpaste and dental products, how much they were getting from food. They calculated all that, and then they looked at these children in terms of tooth decay, expecting to find a relationship. The amount of fluoride that you swallow, you look and see better tooth decay. They didn't find it. They did not find a clear relationship between how much fluoride the kids were swallowing and tooth decay. So they could not define an optimal dose of fluoride. And don't forget, as far as benefits are concerned, the CDC, the big promoter of fluoridation that you yourself cite in the article, the CDC now admits that the predominant benefit of fluoride is topical. In other words, you don't need to swallow it, you just need to brush it on your teeth and spit it out.
answer is absolutely. And even my worthy opponent over there will tell you that fluoride is effective, fluoridation is effective, because he has written many articles saying that toothpaste with fluoride is really good, that going to the dentist and getting fluoridation on your teeth is wonderful. He's written much to say that, in fact, actually, one of the reasons he gives for not wanting to have water or fluoride in water is because we get plenty of fluoride through other means. Fluoridation works. It does. No question about it. Now, if the question is water fluoridation effective, that becomes a different question. This is the question that he was just trying to answer. Okay? So there is a dead question here. I would suggest to you that if fluoridation is effective, period, going to the dentist and getting your teeth hit with that funny, I hated that stuff, the gel they used to put on that tasted like pineapple, right? At least now you can just go in and rinse your mouth once or twice and it works straight. But if that is a problem, if having fluoride is a problem, then every kid, regardless of whether they're drinking fluoridated water or not, would be exposed to fluoride, and their IQ would be altered. We're all a bunch of dummies because we've been drinking and you're going to dentists all our lives. It's only those people who haven't been going to dentists that don't have the fluoride in their bodies. This is basic simple science. Is fluoridation effective? Absolutely. Is water fluoridation effective? Now that gets a little trickier because it's very hard to show. Most people are exposed to natural fluoride. In Prince George, we have fluoride in our water, even if they didn't add any. Okay? So it's really hard to find a place where there is no fluoride in the water, period. And then start a study where you have a whole bunch of people who grow up in that place and look at them and control for every other socioeconomic factor and everything else. And then say, okay, now, is it different? So they do what are called epidemiological studies. And epidemiological studies, I've been teaching a course at the university where we're talking about the concept of variables in different various forms of studies. And chemists, mathematicians, when they do a problem, 2 + 2 = 4. There's no variability in the answer, right? Chemists, they like to have maybe 3 or 4 variables. We're very simple-minded people. We like to keep things simple. When you get to stuff like social science and epidemiology, the number of variables and confounding factors are huge. You have hundreds of thousands of different things going on in a particular population. So these population studies are very hard to do. They're very tricky. But the general consensus amongst the people who do these things and do these studies for a living, people who actually do this work as part of their research and part of their academic careers, is that fluoridation accounts for about a 25% factor in the overall health of teeth. The prevention of dental caries and prevention of gum disease, and helping people's teeth be stronger and healthier. That's not 0, it's not 100%. There's nothing suggesting that if you drink nothing but fluoridated water, you'll have healthy teeth for the rest of your life. You do need to do everything else, go to the dentist every 6 months, get dental checkups, make sure you brush your teeth 3 times a day, and all of that sort of stuff. But fluoridation is part of the package. So the question is, fluoridation of water effective? The answer is yes. It helps with the overall package. It's not going to do it by itself, but it does help with the little bits along the way, about 25%. And that's not insignificant. 0.6 tooth surfaces in the mouth, on average, sure. But it also means that if you look at 0.26 tooth surfaces in a mouth on average, it means, well, some people are going to be way higher, some people are way lower. And so you're going to end up in a position where some people are going to lose their teeth, and some people will be fine. Is fluoride helping? Is fluoride in the water helping? Yes. And in particular, it helps with the lower socioeconomic classes. It helps with, how many of you guys have kids, by the way? Anybody have their kid do the magic toothbrushing? You know, the one where you say, go brush your teeth, and they put the toothpaste on there, and they sort of go, I'm done, right? It helps with a whole range of population that just doesn't have access to the levels of dental health care that we would like them to have. Thank you.
Well, I notice once again that Todd makes categorical statements. Does fluoridation work? Is it effective? Of course it is. Of course it is. All the people who work on this, of course, all the people that work on this say it is. So again, he's appealing to authority. He has not referred to a single scientific study. Now, I referred to two. I referred to two, both financed by the U.S. taxpayer, the Brunel and Carlos study from 1990 and the Warren study from 2009. Now, what Todd did do, as he did in this article, was produce that figure 25%. So here's his quote: community-based water fluoridation prevents at least 25% of tooth decay in both children and adults. And for the average person, that sounds a lot. But where has he got that from? He's got that precisely from the study that I was talking about. This 25%, read, children have always been exposed to community water fluoridation at mean DMF scores of 18%, when some of the background effect is controlled for, it goes up to 25%. The results suggest that water fluoridation has played a dominant role in the decline in carriers and must continue to be a major prevention methodology. But this 18 or 25% is actually 0.6 of a tooth surface. And what should be relevant to a scientist is that that 0.6 of a tooth surface, which I believe is very small and doesn't justify the risk that we're taking, wasn't shown to be statistically significant. So I urge you, Todd, when you're making these statements where you assure the public that everything is safe and everything is fine and honky-dory, you should back it up with the scientific literature and make sure that you understand that literature and that that literature is valid. Otherwise, you're misleading the public.
My 2 minutes. Where to begin? By the way, kids only have 98, 96 surfaces in their mouth because they only have 28 teeth. It's adults who have 128 surfaces.
No,
just to get technical.
Children have 128.
But anyways, so we get into all sorts of interesting discussions here about IQ and stuff like this. And I could quote for you papers after there's Lynn et al. And Zhu et al. And a whole bunch of these articles. And they all talk about these sort of things, and you find them in strange journals like the Proceedings of the Proceedings of the National Dental Association of China, and these sort of things. And some of them were even written in Chinese, which makes them extraordinarily difficult to read. And you're welcome to go look them up. If you read the back of Paul's book, there's references out the yin-yang in the back there, and you can go online and find there's 3,200 articles written in favor of fluoridation, 1,400 rates. You could go look them all up if you really want to, and I could cite them if it makes anybody feel any better. But the articles about IQ are fascinating to read, because first of all, IQ actually doesn't measure anything. The IQ tests, as they were constructed for a particular socioeconomic faction in the United States, and were designed with a very specific purpose, which was to show that certain people in the United States were genetically or mentally inferior, and therefore could be treated badly, for lack of a better way of putting it. It was a part of eugenic movements in the 1920s. They evolved into these sort of modern tests that are supposed to measure something. In fact, they don't. They really actually don't measure something. They're designed for white American children of the age between the ages of 10 and 50. They're not designed for Chinese kids in the middle of southern portions of China. So, getting into this whole question of IQs and changes in IQ, it's just a red herring, and it's just wrong.
So our third and final question is fluoridation safe? And who would like to start?
Well, again, Todd kind of weaseled out giving you specific tests. Oh, I can quote this, I can quote these tests. There are 3,000 tests. I urge you to tell the public what study has most convinced you that fluoridation is effective. Which study convinced you? Not 3,000, but one that's convinced you. And number two, cite me a study that has convinced you that the weight of evidence that fluoride damages the brain can be ignored? What allows you to ignore that? You said you've just chucked out IQ studies in general. We have a meta-analysis from Harvard involving, amongst others, Philippe Grandjean, who's one of the world's experts on mercury and mercury's effect on the development of the fetus. And you're saying that IQ is just irrelevant. So here we have over 100 animal studies which shows that fluoride damages the brain of animals. You have 30 out of 32 studies which shows that fluoride interferes with the learning and memory of animals. Again, the importance of animal studies here is you can control all those variables. You have 3 studies which shows that fluoride damages the fetal brain from China. You've got other neurological studies of children which shows their ability to recall and observe is limited. So you've got all this iceberg, the tip of all this pyramid supporting the tip of the iceberg, if you like, which is that IQ is lowered in children. It isn't just one study, it's 48 studies, and 41 of them showed this lowering of IQ. So en masse, what the Harvard team found was out of 27 studies which they put into a meta-analysis, 26 showed a lowering of IQ. That's remarkable consistency. 26 out of 27, and the average lowering of IQ was 7 IQ points, which is significant. If we shifted the IQ of the US population or the Canadian population by that, we would halve the number of geniuses and double the number of mentally handicapped. But you are prepared to dismiss all that on the basis that you don't think IQ studies have any value whatsoever. But I would ask you, what studies have you read or you can cite which would persuade a public health official that they don't have to worry about the potential of fluoride to damaging the developing baby? Remembering we've removed the protection of that baby. Nature protected that baby by having only a very small amount of fluoride in mother's milk. But we've circumvented that protection because a bottle-fed baby gets, on average, about 250 times more fluoride. And now there's this evidence coming through that not only is fluoride damaging the teeth and causing dental fluorosis, but it could be lowering their IQ. And I would like you to take this seriously and tell me that you've studied the literature and that you can cite studies which alleviates our concern, and not just trivialize it by saying IQ is different. In fact, these studies done in India, Iran, Mexico, and so on, they do adjust the Western measurements of IQ to allow for their cultural differences. Now, I'll save some work for you here, because I'm aware of 2 studies. One animal study, which treated the animals with a large amount of fluoride. That was done by Whitford. So there's one animal study which didn't show an effect on the brain. And there's one IQ study that's just been published in New Zealand by Broadbent. And they claim that they didn't find a lowering of IQ. However, there's a real problem with that study because they had about 981 children living in the fluoridated community. But they only had about 90 living in the non-fluoridated community. So it's a very small power to the study, especially as it's more than likely that the children living in the non-fluoridated community were taking fluoride supplements. In the whole cohort, about 130 kids were taking supplements, fluoride supplements, and it's highly likely that it's the children in the non-fluoridated community that were taking those non-fluoridated supplements, the fluoridated supplements. So you've got those 2 studies. I'm wondering if you have found any other studies which dismiss concerns. And remember, there's a difference between you and me, because I'm trying to stop this. And in science, an ugly fact can destroy a beautiful theory. But you are for continuing to do this. You want to continue to do this, even though a lot of people are saying they don't want to be fluoridated. You want them to continue. Well, the onus is on you to demonstrate, using the scientific literature, that A, it's working, and B, that it's safe. You've done neither.
fluoridation safe? Safe is, again, one of those funny terms. It's like toxic. What do you mean when you say safe? I used to cave. I used to crawl around in the bowels of the earth, we described it as. When I was on a cave in Montana one time, I climbed up on a rope. I was 110 feet in the air hanging from a single rope using a single rappelling apparatus. And actually it was kind of funky because as I was sliding down, this bat came flying by me and was checking me out. Most people, the prospect of standing 110 feet above nothing with it dangling off of a single rope. Anybody want to do it? Right? One person at the back. It scares you. I didn't even have a problem. I actually tied the ropes up, which meant that I knew I was safe, right? On the other hand, I would never jump out of a plane. You couldn't get me in a parachute out of a plane. Heck, if the plane was going down, it would be really hard for me to jump out of the plane in a parachute. Because I don't think parachuting is safe. Everybody has a comfort level when it comes to safety. And safety is one of those concepts that we have a lot of trouble with in our society. And there's reasons why we have trouble with this in our society. The reason is that we don't want to have harm come to those we love, those we care about, those around us. We want our children to grow up and be healthy and strong. And so we want them to be safe. Is it possible? No. If you want to read about this, it's a really great book here. It doesn't mention fluoride at all, by the way. But this is a book by a guy named Dan Gardner. Dan Gardner is a science columnist, writes in Ottawa Citizen, wrote for the Ottawa Citizen, and he wrote this book called Risk. And the underlying title of this is Why We Fear the Things We Shouldn't and Put Ourselves in Greater Danger. It's a wonderful book because, among other things, it points out that, for example, after 9/11, everybody went, oh, we can't fly, that's dangerous. And so they got in their cars and drove around on the roads. Turns out that it ended up killing 1,595 people. More than would have died if everybody had just simply got back to flying. And if you think about that, that doesn't make sense. Yes, it does. But it's one of those things that's sort of counterintuitive. So when we get into the question of safe, what do you mean by safe? If I stuck a kilogram of any sort of fluoridated salt in you, it would kill you. No question about it. But then again, if I stuck a kilogram of sodium chloride in you, it would kill you. If I stuck a kilogram of sugar in you, it would kill you. If I stuck a kilogram of a great many things in you, it would kill you. But at the levels that we're dealing with in fluoridation, is it safe? My opponent here has argued that we have to have this margin of error. Yeah, absolutely, no question about it. Margin error is built in. It's about a factor of 60. To kill an ordinary normal male, you need somewhere in the vicinity of between 5 and 10 grams of fluoride given in a single dose at a single sitting at a single moment in time. To get that, you would have to drink somewhere in the ballpark of about 500 liters of water in a single dose at a single. And I would submit to you that if you sat down and drank 500 liters of water in one sitting at one time, fluoride would be the least of your worries. Finding a bathroom would be a much more important proposition, right? So at the end of the day, when you talk about safety, when you talk about safety margins, yes, there are safety margins built in. When you talk about other issues, yeah, it becomes a question of, my three notes here. Does fluoride at optimal levels cause illness? No. Despite his reference to the scientific literature, I would defy Paul to come up with a single scientific paper, peer-reviewed scientific paper, that definitively shows that fluoride has killed anybody at optimal levels. Okay? And they don't exist, by the way. I would also point out to you, it's possible, is it possible for drinking water to reach toxic levels? I would suggest no, although I suppose somebody could sit down and drink 500 liters of water at one time, sure. Is cancer related to fluoride? No, there's no proof of the connection. Is bone disease related to fluoride? No, there's no proof of the connection. Is IQ loss related to fluoride? I've read those papers, read many of those papers. There's a really great one that I was reading, it was by Chu et al. And it was great because they said, these kids, they were living in a place where there was 12.8 parts per million of fluoride in drinking water. and they had an IQ deficiency. And these communities they compared it to had 4.8 parts per million of fluoride in their drinking water. Hold on a second, both of them had fluoride in their drinking water. How can you say that the fluoride's the cause? If they both have fluoride in their drinking water, and they're both above our 1.6 optimal level that Paul espouses, then both should have had IQ deficiencies, and yet the group at 4.8 didn't. Big study, 480 kids in 2 different communities. Do I say, am I dismissing the IQ? Yes, it's a false error, if you ask me. But anyways, thank you.
Well, once again, Todd has done some semantic playing with words. He's confusing lethal dose with toxic dose. And I explained to you that one of those studies in China, the lowering of IQ occurred in children drinking 1.26 parts per million. Those children were not likely using fluoridated toothpaste, were probably not a bottle fed. And so children in Canada drinking water at 0.7 could easily exceed the same dose from the amount of water. They don't need to drink 500 litres, probably just drinking 2 litres will be sufficient to exceed the dose in those Chinese studies. And the issue again is margin of safety. He says, tell me one study which shows that at optimal doses there's been health effects. Number one, Canada is not doing those studies. Number one, they look at if people are growing horns as to whether they've been harmed by fluoridation. But there is one study, and actually there's several. One study at 0.88 parts per million, fluoride was lowered in a Chinese study with, where there was borderline iodine deficiency. It lowered it more at 0.88. There's a study from Harvard University by Elise Bassin, published in 2006, that young boys drinking fluoridated water at optimal levels in their 6th, 7th, and 8th years had a 5- to 7-fold increased risk of succumbing to osteosarcoma, which is a frequently fatal bone cancer. Now, her thesis advisor, Chester Douglas, promised a study. He said, my larger study will refute this thesis. He promised it for 2006, but we had to wait for another 5 years before this was finally published. And it in no way refuted Bassin's thesis. No way. Because the biometric of exposure was the fluoride levels in bones and autopsy and biopsy. You cannot use those to predict the level that the kids were exposed to in their 6th, 7th, and 8th years. So that is an unrefuted study. It's peer-reviewed, it's published, and it's a high-quality study. And it's unrefuted. But you, I presume, are prepared to take that gamble. You might be killing a few, not many, a few young boys each year with this practice.
Oh, where to begin? Yeah, Bassin study is a rather interesting study. There's all sorts of controversy around that, but the methodology for it has been refuted on numerous occasions by numerous people, showing that it was flawed and that there were a whole bunch of factors that weren't controlled for, and so on and so forth. And like I said, epidemiological studies are extraordinarily difficult to do. Paul's made several references. A Harvard meta-study. How many of you guys know what a meta-study is? Anybody?
Basically a summary of a whole bunch of other studies.
So is there anything original or new that's added by a meta-study?
Not really, they just try to
from other studies?
Yeah.
So we've got 26 Chinese studies that came up with this idea that IQ was affected. We put them all together in one study, and somehow it's a meta-study, and somehow it's now supposed to be adding new information to the debate about fluoride. Not really. No, not at all. But more fundamental. As I said, I'm a bio-inorganic chemist. I'm interested in metals and other components of people's bodies. It turns out the average adult male is made up of about 45 kilograms of oxygen and 12 kilograms of carbon and some hydrogen, calcium phosphate, And you go down the list, and it turns out that if you take the average human body, average adult body, and you analyze it for you, what you find is about 1.2 grams of fluoride in the average adult. Okay. Now, fluoride is one of these neat little ions that if you put it into bone, it'll dissolve back into the bloodstream, and then it'll dissolve back and reformate into bones or into teeth, and then backwards and forwards. So basically it exists in, first year chemistry tells you that everything exists in equilibrium. Your fluoride in your body is going to exist as an equilibrium in your bloodstream. That means that you're going to have fluoride in your bloodstream. So if the basic hypothesis is that fluoride in water somehow lowers IQ, then fluoride in blood should be lowering your IQ. If fluoride in blood lowers your IQ, everybody in this room has fluoride in your blood. Do you guys feel that much stupider? Hopefully not, and hopefully not by the end of this discussion, right? Thank you.
Well, it's funny that Todd should mention fluoride in the blood, because Yang actually showed a correlation between the level of fluoride in the blood of those children and the lowered IQ. So the more fluoride there was in the blood, the lower the IQ in those children. But the amount of fluoride, when you swallow fluoride, so it goes across the stomach, the gastrointestinal tract, and it does go into the blood. But very quickly, two things happen. One, the kidney gets rid of maybe 50 to 60% of the fluoride that you ingest each day, and the other 40–50% accumulates in your bone. So the bone is sequestering fluoride, just as it sequesters lead, another neurotoxicant. And that fluoride in our bones steadily accumulates in a lifetime. And one of the concerns I have about that particular issue is that the first symptoms of fluoride poisoning of the bones, well established in India and China, are symptoms just like arthritis. Aching of the joints, pains in the joints, pains in the bone. Now, unfortunately, Health Canada has never bothered to study to see if there's any relationship in Canada with the amount of time you've lived in the fluoridated community and arthritis rates. Now, Health Canada is one of those authorities that Todd relies upon. And I think you've now got to distinguish between politics and science. In 2007, Health Canada selected a panel of 6 experts to review the literature of fluoridation's safety and effectiveness. Of the 6 panelists they chose, 4 of them were dentists, well known for promoting fluoridation. Stephen Levy from the United States, Christopher Clark from British Columbia, Michael Levy from Quebec, and Jay Kumar from the New York State Department of Health. Jay Kumar is an avid promoter of fluoridation. He was also on the National Research Council review panel. Now, if Health Canada was interested in objectivity, they could have chosen Hardy Lineback, who was also on the National Research Council. He's from Toronto. And so there they had 2 dentists with PhDs. But one is a proponent of fluoridation, one is an opponent. Both served on the National Research Council for 3.5 years. So the ideal thing would have had both of them on that panel, and then we might have got an objective view of things. Did we? No. This is what the panel said of the IQ studies. Weight of evidence does not support a link between fluoride and intelligence quotients. Weight of evidence. I ask you, where is there weight of evidence that deals with 100 animal studies which shows prolonged exposure damages the brain, 30 out of 32 animal studies which shows the animals less able to learn and remember, 12 other studies on Europe, 3 human fetal studies, and 41 out of 48 studies. Now, of course, when they reviewed those IQ studies, there were only 23 published. But they only reviewed 5 of them. Why did they only review 5 and not the 23? Okay, well, you could forgive the expert panel. Maybe they just weren't aware of the other 18 studies. But when Health Canada asked for citizens to put input in, I provided the missing 18 studies. I provided the missing 18 studies to Health Canada. What did they do? When they wrote their report, they relied entirely on this expert panel. more or less said the same thing and completely ignored the 18 studies I sent to them. So what you're looking at here is politics, not science. For whatever reason, the only rational explanation for a lot of irrational behavior from Health Canada is right now they're more interested in protecting this policy than protecting the health of the Canadian people. And I think possibly for the reasons I would suspect for that is that they feel if they lose fluoridation after promoting it for 40 or 50 years, it's going to affect their credibility, they're going to lose the public's trust, and that will impact other public health policies that they are promoting, including vaccination, of course, which is a multi-billion-dollar interest. So whatever the reason, it's politics which are operating now and not science. And Todd, you could make a real contribution to this with your scientific training. You could actually read the literature. You could read the literature. You could read my book, study it, and be another independent scientist who can pass some judgments and separate science from politics. It is not healthy for this country and our country to have driven a wedge between honest science and public health policy. We will rue the day in the future that we did that. We've got to be able to trust our public health agencies, and the only way that they can regain our trust is to come out and be clean and admit that this fluoridation was a huge mistake and to stop it now.
Actually what I'm going to do is after Todd gives us 5 minutes, we're going to take a 5-minute break, and those of you who want to ask questions, please feel free to write them down, and we'll go through the question and answer after the debate. You have 5 minutes?
I have read a great many of the studies, and I read a great many of the books on the subject, and I'm convinced that there's an issue here that is worthy of this sort of level of animosity. I've tried. I got introduced to the fluoride, well, I got introduced to the fluoride debate very long ago, longer ago than I'm going to admit to here, but a very long time ago, when the city I was living in had a whole issue and debate and discussion around fluoride and so on. And I've sort of kept tracks on it and tabs on it over the years. It's not the main focus of what I do, it's not the main focus of my research interest. Most of my time I spend now talking about public understanding of science. And I've tried for a very long time to understand why some people feel certain ways about the fluoride. And about, what it was, about 1999 or something like this, I was on a listserv site, and I made a somewhat facetious and probably in bad taste comment that, you know, it'd be nice if the people who are opposed to fluoride could at least spell it right. Because it often ends up in the newspaper as fluoride, which is, as a chemist, just grates on your nerves and it grates on your teeth. Anyways, and the listserv immediately fired back and proceeded to rightly chastise me for the comment, because it was a flippant and facetious comment. But two women in particular sort of jumped up and down and said, you know, you really need to talk to this doctor in England. And I said, okay, well, maybe I'm wrong here, you know. Science is an open-minded process, so I got hold of this guy. I actually phoned him up, made arrangements, phoned this guy. And I said, you know, I understand you have a problem with fluoride. He said, well, yeah, and the reason I have a problem with it, his start to it was this kid had showed up in the medical, at a hospital, emergency room, after taking an entire tube of toothpaste. You know those cheesy things that you used to have in the little squeezy tubes and you used to squirt them on crackers? She did that with a tube of toothpaste. You know, the thing where you start at the bottom, you sort of go like this, and you squirt the whole thing in your mouth and suck it down. So she basically sucked down a whole tube of toothpaste. And I would suggest to you that the fluoride on that toothpaste was probably a minor consideration, considering that toothpaste contains various things like titanium dioxide and calcium carbonate and all sorts of other strange compounds and stuff like this, along with agars and gums and detergents and so on. But she showed up there, and that's where he sort of got involved. He's a medical doctor. And I said, well, gee, so what's the evidence that you have that fluoride's a problem? He says, well, in certain parts of England where they have high natural fluoridation in the water, 17.4% of the women have hip fractures. Holy cow, I said, 17.4, that's huge. And I don't know if you know anything about hip fractures, but unfortunately about 50% of the women who suffer from hip fracture die within a year of getting them. It's an unfortunate truth of our medical system because of the way the femoral artery goes through the hip fracture can often prove to be fatal. So that's 17.4%, this is astronomical. And so I said to him, wow, what's the fraction of women in the rest of England, in the areas without the high fluoride, that get hip fractures? He said, what, 17.4%? And I said, hold on a second, it's 17.4% in the area with high fluoride, and 17.4% in the area without high fluoride. Yeah, he says. I said, well, what makes you think that the fluoride's, you know, they're the same number? He said, well, yeah, but you know the fluoride's got to be doing something. No, fluoride isn't doing something. But I've tried for years to understand what his motive was. I've tried for years to understand why people do things. This is actually what I like to do, is try to understand what people's motives are. I still don't understand the motive of the people who are against fluoride to a large degree. And I'm quite willing to be entertained with somebody telling me why they believe that fluoride has to be removed from the drinking water. And yes, Paul, I know you've tried to do so, but I still am not convinced by her arguments. So, that said, thank you very much.
Well, you know, the people that promote fluoridation seem to run away from the science and prefer to go into trying to understand why anybody could be opposed to fluoridation. They even have words for this, fluorophobics, that we meant to froth at the mouth. I should remind you that 18 years ago, I didn't want this issue because I'd fallen for what Todd is obviously falling for, that the people opposed to fluoridation are a bunch of Looney Tunes. There's something wrong with their mental capacities. But my wife persuaded me to read the literature, and after 14 years, the book is a result. So I don't think you can read that book, written by 3 retired professors, one of physics, one of biology, and one of chemistry, and try to pretend that there's something wrong with people that are opposed to fluoridation. The thing that is wrong is the science says it's a problem. The science does not indicate that swallowing fluoride reduces tooth decay. That's a problem for promoters. The science says that there are health problems with no adequate margin of safety. And the ethics says you've got no right to force this on people that don't want it. So your problem is with the science. And if you really want to seriously debate this, you should have come armed with the science. Not your conversations over the phone with some crackpot doctor in England. That doesn't convince anybody. But if you could produce the science which says there's no evidence, for example, as you use the evidence of hip fracture. If you go to chapter 17 in our book, we look at the evidence that fluoride reduces hip fracture. And you might have wanted to comment on the study done in China, but by an American research team, which looked at hip fracture rates in 8 villages. And what they found with those hip fracture rates, there wasn't much difference between the lower than 1 part per million village, but as the level of fluoride increased from 1 part per million to 1.5 parts per million to 2.7, eventually to 4.3 parts per million, the hip fractures appeared to increase. The hip fracture rates appeared to increase in a linear fashion. And if you were to look at the numbers, it would be certainly suggestive, and the World Health Organization has used the figure, possibly 6 milligrams a day may increase fracture rates, hip fracture rates. And if you look at our linear extrapolation, maybe as low as 3 milligrams a day of fluoride may increase your susceptibility to hip fractures.
I'll just have 2 words. First of all, please understand, I'm not saying that people are opposed to fluoride in any way, shape, or form are loony. I don't think that. I don't understand their motives, but that doesn't make them loony. I also don't understand a great many other things in the world. But that's just one of them, okay? So please, if I gave anybody the impression that I thought people who don't understand or don't want fluoride is loony, no. And everybody's entitled to their own view on this, and you know, this is what the referendum will ultimately decide next time. Okay?
So we're going to take a break now for about 5 minutes. the basket if you want to put a donation. Oh, I'll put it down here at the front. But please feel free to write down any questions you have, and we'll give them each a minute and a half to answer your questions.
So the first question here is, Dr. Whitcombe, please explain how non-fluoridated countries' tooth decay rates are the same as fluoridated ones, according to World Health Organization data.
So, yes, and that was a question that I got out of this, and like I said, it's my job to answer that question. As I said, it's virtually impossible to do a study where you would have a population where there's absolutely no fluoride in their water, and there's no exposure to fluoride during the course of their life. Most countries now have some form of dentistry. Most countries now have some form of toothpaste with fluoride in it, and most have some form of natural fluoridation in their water, because fluoride is a naturally occurring anionic compound or anionic species that dissolves in water from all those minerals in the ground and so on and so forth. So this is where, like I said, it gets very difficult to do these epidemiological studies and try to tease out, okay, is this caused by fluoride or an added fluoride in the water, or is it caused by increases in dental usage, or is it caused by increasing usage, or is it caused by drinking tea, which has fluoride in it? Anybody who drinks tea are getting far more fluoride out of the tea than you are out of the water. So, you know, it's hard to sort of pull these things apart and sort of pull the data apart. But you certainly can cherry pick and say, okay, if I look at these 10 countries, and I look at these 10 countries, and I compare their rates, they look the same. And then you go and look at 10 other countries, and you find that they're not the same, and you pull another 10 countries, and it's all different. Unless you were to sit down and look at all 192 countries in the world, look at the measurable fluoride rates, and tease out all the socioeconomic factors and so on and so forth. It's a job that if somebody wants to do it, I'm sure that there's a Ph.D. in it somewhere to try and tease that all apart. And I'm sorry I can't give you a better answer than that, but the simple reality is that there isn't a better answer to that question.
Thank you.
Your turn, Paul.
Okay. Well, you say it's difficult to do. Sorry, hold on just a second. Stop the clock a moment. I can't, for some reason. Bear with me just a second. I don't know what's happening. Anyway, I do work. You say, yes, you've got a control for this, that, and the other, but notice the agency that you've respected, you've quoted as saying that fluoridation is one of the top 10 public health achievements of the 20th century. That very agency in the same paper tried to use the fall in tooth decay in 12-year-olds in the United States, tried to persuade the people that that was due to the increase in fluoridation rates, when obviously, as you mentioned, there were all these other factors to consider. And if you take exactly the same thing that they plotted, tooth decay in 12-year-olds, as a function of time, and they claim it was caused by fluoridation, and then you look at about 16 other countries, you find you get the same declines in tooth decay as in the United States. So they are the ones who are using it rather flippantly, trying to assume that this drop in tooth decay is caused by fluoridation, when if you look at the larger picture, you can't find that causal relationship at all. Oh, I can ask you a question now?
No, I didn't ask you.
No, your turn.
My turn. Okay, we'll give you this one first. If there is any possibility of fluoride causing harm by taking it internally, and its benefit to preventing tooth decay are almost only if it is used topically, why do we risk no. Let me try and parse this. Why do we take the risk of ingesting it where it will reach every tissue and cell in our bodies?
Well, that's a very good question, Todd. It's my concern. I think that's why fluoridation should have ended in 1999 when the agency that you yourself quote, the CDC, admitted in the same paper that buttressed this claim that fluoridation is one of the top 10 public health achievements. In their same paper, indicated that the predominant benefit of fluoride is topical, not systemic. So in other words, they're saying you don't have to risk exposing every tissue through ingestion, because with fluoridated toothpaste, you can brush it on your teeth and spit it out. Now you will get some exposure, but not with every glass of water that you drink. And so why take these risks? Why take the risks, and you deny them, but the risks of bone damage, tooth damage with dental fluorosis, lowered IQ, why take all those risks if you can get the benefits topically? You don't have to swallow them. The benefits are topical, the risks are systemic. It seems pretty obvious to me that this is not a rational practice.
Okay? Two things in your answer, Paul. One, you said predominantly. Predominantly doesn't mean only, it just means predominantly. 70% of the effect is topical. Sure, okay, that would be predominantly. 51% of the effect is topical. That would be predominantly. So the notion that just because it's predominant means that it's exclusive is not a valid notion. But the other sort of fallacy in what you're saying is that if you truly do believe, and you've written many times about this, that fluoride does help prevent tooth decay, that fluoride in teeth strengthens teeth and is good for the dentistry, then you have to believe that because fluoride is an anionic species, capable of dissolving in water, anytime that you expose a fluoride mineral, such as tooth enamel, which has fluoride in it, to water, there is going to be a partitioning of the fluoride between the tooth enamel and that water will go into your stomach and therefore end up in your entire system. That if you have fluoride in your teeth at all, then you have to have fluoride throughout the entire system. Simple chemical equilibria rules there. And so the problem is that if you argue that you either have to argue there's no fluoride anywhere, which is physically impossible, or you have to argue that, well, geez, it's really not causing that much of a problem. My turn for a question.
Yeah. Well, can I just respond to that?
Oh, really?
Okay.
So I definitely need to respond to the next question. It's your question.
No, it's his turn for a task question.
How many children have died from drinking fluoridated water versus how many children have died from dental procedures to treat caries?
That's a rather interesting question, and it goes back to the comment I made about providing a study that said that people have died from fluoride. To the best of my knowledge, and one study on bone carcinomas aside, fluoride hasn't actually ever killed any kids. But I do know that a number of children die every year because of poor dental health, because of gum disease, because of rot in their teeth, that there is certainly a strong correlation and linkage between tooth decay and such things as myocardial infarctions or heart attacks. So you end up in this position where, tooth decay is a real problem. Northern Health spends about $1.8 million a year doing dental surgeries for children who have poor dental health. If you were to add Prince George to that pool, and Northern Health does the entire northern part of the province, and there are many communities up here that don't have fluoride in their drinking water. If you were to throw Prince George into the pool, recognizing there's about 80,000 people in Prince George, and that we have a significant portion of the population in northern British Columbia, they've reckoned that that's going to cost another about $1.8 million a year. Whereas we're going to save, what, 56,000 or even 100,000? It depends on what you want to argue is the cost of putting fluoride in the water. And is it going to end up with kids who are going to end up with poor dental health and end up dying because of it? Yes. But at the end of the day, people get to decide whether they want fluoride in your drinking water.
Well, first of all, I'm not opposed to fluoridation because I think fluoridated water is going to kill people outright. You want an example where it has. A child swallowed the varnish, the mouth the gel that they do in the dental chair and died from swallowing that. That's not the point. The point is we're concerned about erosion of people's health, lowering of IQ. That's not killing somebody, but it can have a big effect. Increasing hip fractures, lowering thyroid function. There are many, many concerns which have nothing to do with killing people. So that is a red herring. Now, in terms of the tooth decay and death, okay, hold on a second. Oh, I said sorry. Here we go. Now, this is a bit of propaganda which I think you'll enjoy. According to Queensland Health, which is a civil service, health agency, teeth exposed to fluoridated water look like that, whereas teeth without exposure to fluoridated water like that. Absolute propaganda, but that was part of the postcard that was sent to every MP in Queensland before they introduced mandatory fluoridation. Now let me explain what this is, because it's relevant to this discussion. This is baby bottle tooth decay. This is caused by when a baby sucks on a bottle containing milk, sugared water, fruit juice, even Coca-Cola for hours on end. You notice it rots the top teeth, the top milk teeth, and not the bottom teeth. That often leads to extractions under anesthesia. But don't think that this is caused by lack of fluoride. This is bad practices, and those are what have to be addressed. You get as many cases of this in fluoridated communities as non-fluoridated communities. So when health officers in Canada, like this lady, the medical officer of health from Owen Sound, shows these pictures to people suggesting that this is what happens when you don't have fluoridated water, this is intellectually dishonest. This has got nothing to do whether you've got fluoridated water or not fluoridated water. And the same applies to extractions of under anesthesia for teeth. This is not a reflection of not having fluoridated water.
Final question.
Okay, our final quick question. You're going to love this one. Does reverse osmosis get rid of the fluoride ion in the water? Is there any problem or hazards with reverse osmosis? And how do you avoid the fluoride in the water?
With difficulty. The cheap filters, the Brita filters, will not remove fluoride. Reverse osmosis does, although it depends upon the equipment and the size and the flow rate and all kinds of things. But I certainly use reverse osmosis under my kitchen sink. Starbucks, if you're interested in getting coffee without fluoride, Starbucks uses reverse osmosis. And of course, a lot of bottled water that you buy from Pepsi and Coca-Cola is reverse osmosis. So it does work. However, in terms of protecting yourself, it's very, very difficult. Even if you have the reverse osmosis, you're still being exposed to fluoride in your shower, in your baths. When you go downtown or you go to work, every cup of coffee that you drink has fluoridated water in it. Every beverage that you drink has got fluoride in it. Every meal that you have at a restaurant. When you go to someone's house, it's got fluoride in it. It's a horrible, insidious thing that we really don't want. Many of us don't want this thing that you can't avoid. I feel the same way about genetically engineered crops. I don't want to have to worry about what's in my food in that respect. But this is forced upon us. It's insidious. We don't want it. And there's a complete disproportion between the impositions we apply, expose the two communities here. If you take the community that wants fluoride, but Prince George takes it out, we're not depriving them of fluoride. They can go and they can get fluoridated bottled water, or they can brush their teeth with fluoridated toothpaste. We're not depriving them of anything. They probably already use fluoridated toothpaste. But if you leave it in, look at the imposition on folks like us. We have to pay a lot of money for reverse osmosis, and even then we can't protect ourselves from all the sources of fluoride. It's unnecessary and it's unethical to force it upon us, particularly low-income families.
Does reverse osmosis get rid of the fluoride in the water? No. It gets rid of some of the fluoride in the water, but you can't get rid of all the fluoride in the water because it's a semi-permeable membrane, and as such it allows anionic flow through it, and therefore you will still get some fluoride in the water, even if you are using a reverse osmosis system. Is there any problems or hazards with the reverse osmosis? Huge problems and hazards with reverse osmosis, if you want to get really technical about it. Nothing to do with fluoride. What reverse osmosis does is it changes the electrolyte balance in the water. And the fun part is that then when that gets in your digestive system, your body is basically built to accommodate certain electrolytes coming from the water into the body. You move the electrolytes from the water, the electrolytes go from the body to the water, and you end up with iron deficiencies and all sorts of other problems. So if you're drinking reverse osmosis water, it's not something I would recommend. That said, there really isn't any other mechanism, because pretty much all of the other mechanisms for trying to purify water, I have a water softener at home. Put sodium in my water. That's not a healthy thing because, well, then you end up with lots of sodium in your system and so on and so forth. Anyways, how do you avoid fluoride in water? You don't. Simple reality is it doesn't matter where you drink water, where you get your water from, how you get your water. Even if you get your water out of bottled water systems, it will have fluoride in it because, well, you just can't avoid it. And I'm sorry, but that's the simple truth. As to whether you want to have fluoride at an optimally optimized level, that's a different question. But there is no such thing as pure water. Sorry.
Well, I'll give you each 2 minutes to talk, sort of your comment. And then I'm going to call it a day.
Yeah. Look, there is a way of making sure that a certain section of the public avoids fluoride. It's called breastfeeding. If you breastfeed your baby, which is nature's way, you give your baby very little fluoride. But if you are especially a low-income family in a fluoridated community, then it becomes extremely difficult to protect your baby from fluoride. If you use the tap water, you're going to be exposing your baby to about 200 times more fluoride than nature intended. And I think, Todd, you ignore that. I would really like at some point to hear your reasoning why you think, if fluoride is so natural, it's everywhere, why is it that nature, which had no shortage, according to you, of a supply of fluoride in developing mother's milk, why did she do it? Why did she not give fluoride to the newborn baby?
Well, partly because nature doesn't give you things, it doesn't take things away. We evolve. And partly because that's a bizarre argument going, Paul. You just said that low-income women don't breastfeed? Seriously?
Well,
I would have thought low-income women would be breastfeeding because formula costs money, and breast milk, as far as I've ever understood, please correct me if I'm wrong, women in the audience, is free of charge.
Yeah.
Right? So why would low-income families not breastfeed?
Because they're busy work. Many of them are busy working 2 or 3 jobs a day, and therefore they don't have the time to breastfeed their babies all day long.
Okay.
But let me rephrase it then. Let me say that low-income families that bottle feed their babies, that's where the problem comes.
So, I want to thank two very passionate men who took part of their day, so traveled a great distance to be here, to speak to a subject. And it's people like that, or these two gentlemen, whether you agree with them or not agree with them, are the ones that try to help all of us make the right decision, whichever direction we decide to go in. One of the big things about today is to get up and vote, whatever direction you decide.
Absolutely.